Last month, a driver stood in my shop holding gas receipts like evidence in a trial. Frustrated, confused, borderline angry. She swore her car was perfect 6 months ago. Same routes, same driving style, same gas station. Now she's filling up twice as often and her wallet is screaming. I asked one question: when did you last check your oxygen sensor? She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. That's when I knew exactly what was happening. Her engine wasn't sick, it was being lied to, and that lie was quietly draining her bank account every single mile. Most people think cars warn you when something's wrong. Check engine lights, weird noises, rough running. That's the deal, right? But here's what mechanics know and drivers don't. There's a sensor buried deep in your exhaust system that can slowly fail for months without triggering a single warning. It drifts, it gets lazy, it starts feeding your engine computer false information about how much fuel to burn, and your car compensates perfectly, so perfectly that you'd swear nothing changed, except your suddenly terrible gas mileage. The EPA says a failing oxygen sensor can destroy up to 40% of your fuel economy. Think about that. If you're supposed to get 30 miles per gallon, you're suddenly getting 18. That's not a rounding error. That's real money disappearing into exhaust fumes every single week, and most drivers blame everything except the actual problem. They blame winter gas, traffic, bad fuel, getting older, the engine settling in. All reasonable guesses, all completely wrong. Here's what's really happening. Your engine doesn't decide how much fuel to burn, a computer does, and that computer relies entirely on sensor data to make those decisions. One of the most critical sensors sits in your exhaust pipe measuring oxygen levels in real time. Every fraction of a second, it checks how much oxygen is left after combustion. If there's too much oxygen, the mixture is lean. Not enough oxygen means it's rich. The sensor reports back to the engine computer constantly, multiple times per second when it's healthy. That rapid switching keeps your engine running at peak efficiency. But oxygen sensors don't live in a spa. They're mounted directly in the exhaust stream, exposed to extreme heat, constant vibration, corrosive gases, carbon buildup, moisture from condensation, sulfur from fuel. Over time, usually somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 miles depending on driving conditions, the sensor starts to degrade. It doesn't die dramatically, it just gets slower, less accurate, lazier. When a healthy sensor measures exhaust gases, it switches rapidly between rich and lean readings. That switching happens several times per second. It's a constant dance. The engine computer watches those rapid switches and knows everything is balanced. Combustion is clean, fuel delivery is precise, efficiency is maximized. But when the sensor ages, that dance slows down. The voltage signal gets sluggish. It stops switching quickly. Sometimes it gets stuck reading rich for seconds at a time. Other times it barely moves at all. Here's where it gets expensive. The engine computer doesn't know the sensor is lying. It trusts that data completely. So when the sensor sends a signal that the mixture is lean, even though it's actually fine, the computer does what it's programmed to do. It adds more fuel, more on startup, more during acceleration, more at highway cruise, more at idle. Every single fuel injection event gets adjusted based on bad information. Your engine is literally being overfed because a dying sensor is crying wolf. The truly insidious part is that the engine runs smoothly through all of this. The computer compensates so well that you feel nothing wrong behind the wheel. No stumbling, no hesitation, no rough idle. The extra fuel gets burned, the engine makes power. Everything seems normal. Except you're burning gallons of gasoline you don't need, and your fuel economy falls off a cliff while your car feels perfectly healthy. This is why so many drivers miss it. They assume fuel economy just naturally gets worse over time. Engines wear out, right? Mileage drops as cars age. That's normal. Except it's not. A well-maintained engine with good compression and clean fuel delivery should maintain nearly identical fuel economy for 200,000 miles or more. When mileage suddenly drops without any other symptoms, it's almost always sensor-related, and the oxygen sensor is suspect number one. I've watched this scenario play out more times than I can count. A customer brings in a sedan with 80,000 miles, complains about fuel economy, says it used to get 28 on the highway, now barely hits 22, but the car runs great otherwise. No codes, no lights, nothing. Most shops would start guessing, throw parts at it, new air filter, maybe spark plugs, fuel system cleaner, hope something sticks. That's expensive guessing, and it usually misses the real problem entirely. The smart move is pulling data, real data, not just scanning for codes. Actually watching what the sensors are doing in real time. When you hook up a quality scan tool and graph the oxygen sensor voltage, the truth shows itself within seconds. A healthy sensor at idle should be bouncing. Up and down, rich, lean, rich, lean. That voltage swing should be rapid and consistent. When I see a flat line or a lazy wave that barely moves, I know immediately. The sensor is done. It's feeding garbage data, and the fuel trims prove it. Fuel trims are the engine computer's confession. They tell you exactly how much the computer is compensating to keep the engine running right. Short-term fuel trims react instantly to changing conditions. Long-term fuel trims are the computer's learned adjustments over time. On a healthy engine, long-term trims hover near zero, maybe plus or minus 5%. That's normal adaptation. But when I see long-term trims sitting at 20 or 25% positive, that's the computer screaming. It's adding massive amounts of fuel constantly, trying to fix a lean condition that doesn't actually exist. Because a lazy oxygen sensor is telling it there's too much oxygen in the exhaust when there isn't. Walk into most repair shops with this complaint and you'll get a dozen different guesses. Maybe it's your air filter, maybe spark plugs, maybe the fuel pump is weak, maybe you need a tune-up. All plausible, all potentially expensive, and usually all wrong. Because most shops don't test the oxygen sensor properly. They check for diagnostic codes. If there's no code, they assume it's fine. But here's the problem. The sensor has to fail catastrophically before it triggers a check engine light. Slight drift, the kind that murders your fuel economy, rarely sets a code. The computer just adapts and keeps driving. I've seen this pattern hundreds of times. Engine with perfect compression, clean injectors, strong spark, good air filter, fresh fuel. Everything checks out mechanically, yet the fuel economy is 25% lower than it should be. When you finally graph the oxygen sensor response on a professional scan tool, the truth reveals itself instantly. The sensor is slow, lazy, stuck, not switching fast enough, and the fuel trims, the computer's adjustments to maintain proper mixture, are elevated. The engine is adding fuel constantly trying to correct a problem that doesn't exist. The smell often gives it away before any test does. When an oxygen sensor starts failing rich, the engine burns excess fuel. That extra fuel creates a distinct odor, slightly sweet, faintly sulfuric, sometimes almost like rotten eggs. Most people never consciously notice it, but park that car in a closed garage for 30 seconds and the smell becomes obvious. It's the scent of money being burned. There's another giveaway mechanics watch for: black soot around the tailpipe. When engines burn extra fuel, some of it exits unburned or partially burned. That creates dark residue inside the exhaust tip. Run your finger inside a healthy exhaust and you'll see light gray or tan deposits. A car with a rich running engine from a bad oxygen sensor leaves black oily carbon. It's a visual confession of wasted fuel. Temperature tells a story too. Catalytic converters are designed to burn off trace amounts of unburned fuel, but when a failing oxygen sensor floods the engine with extra fuel, the converter works overtime. It gets hotter than normal. In extreme cases, you can literally feel the heat radiating from underneath the car after a drive. That extra heat shortens the converter's life, so now you're not just wasting fuel. You're cooking a $1,500 part because a $60 sensor is failing. The ripple effects go further than most people realize. Excess fuel doesn't just disappear, it contaminates your engine oil. Gasoline washing past the piston rings dilutes the oil. That diluted oil doesn't protect as well. It breaks down faster. Suddenly you're dealing with accelerated engine wear because a sensor you've never heard of is dumping too much fuel into the cylinders. The fuel that makes it past the rings ends up in the crankcase. You smell it on the dipstick, that sweet gasoline odor mixed with motor oil. It's not supposed to be there. Spark plugs suffer too. Rich mixtures create carbon deposits on plug electrodes. Those deposits interfere with spark quality. Eventually they cause misfires. Now you've got a misfire problem on top of your fuel economy problem, and both trace back to the same failing sensor. This is how a $60 part can cascade into a $2,000 repair if you ignore it long enough. Here's what drives me crazy about this whole situation. The fix is simple. Replace the sensor, reset the fuel trims, let the computer relearn, and suddenly your fuel economy comes roaring back. We're talking improvements of 5 to 10 miles per gallon in many cases. That's real money. If you drive 12,000 miles a year and gas costs $3.50 per gallon, improving from 20 to 25 miles per gallon saves you $350 annually. The sensor costs maybe $60 to $100 depending on the vehicle. You're cash positive in less than 4 months, but most drivers never connect the dots. They just keep filling up more often, complaining about gas prices, wondering why their car isn't as efficient as it used to be. Meanwhile, the real culprit sits in the exhaust pipe, slowly strangling their fuel economy mile after mile. Let me walk you through exactly what I see when testing one of these sensors properly. The car comes in with the complaint: fuel economy dropped. No other symptoms. First thing I do is warm the engine to operating temperature. Cold engines run rich by design. You can't diagnose an oxygen sensor on a cold engine. Once it's warm, I plug in the scan tool. Not one of those cheap code readers. A real scan tool that shows live data and graphs sensor voltages. I pull up the oxygen sensor voltage, set it to graph mode, let it run. Within seconds, the pattern reveals itself. A healthy sensor looks like a heartbeat monitor. Constant rapid switching. The voltage jumps from around 100 millivolts to 900 millivolts and back, over and over, several times per second. That's what I want to see. That tells me the sensor is responsive. The engine is getting accurate data, fuel delivery should be optimized. But when the sensor is failing, the graph tells a completely different story. Sometimes the voltage barely moves. It might sit at 450 millivolts and just lazily drift up and down in slow waves. Other times it gets stuck high, maybe 700 or 800 millivolts. Just sits there, barely budging. The engine computer sees that steady, high voltage and interprets it as a rich condition, so it starts pulling fuel. But the sensor is so slow that by the time it reacts, the mixture has gone lean. Then the computer adds fuel back. The whole system becomes this delayed feedback loop. The engine is chasing a target it can never hit because the sensor is too slow to keep up. The fuel trim data confirms what the oxygen sensor graph suggests. I check both short-term and long-term fuel trims. Short-term should be bouncing around, +3, -2, +5, -4. That's normal real-time adjustment, but long-term is where the truth lives. Long-term fuel trim is the computer's learned behavior. If it's consistently adding 20% more fuel, that number locks in. The computer remembers it, uses it as the baseline. That's when you know the sensor has been lying for a long time. I've seen long-term fuel trims as high as 35% positive. That means the computer is adding 35% more fuel than the engine actually needs, just to maintain what it thinks is proper air-fuel ratio, based entirely on bad sensor data. That's an obscene amount of wasted fuel, and the driver has no idea. The car runs fine, smooth, quiet, responsive. Everything feels normal except the wallet-destroying fuel consumption. Testing this properly requires seeing what the sensor is actually doing in real time. You need a scan tool that graphs sensor voltage, not just reads codes. Actually shows you the waveform. A healthy oxygen sensor voltage should look like a rapid heartbeat on the graph. Up and down, constantly switching between roughly 0.1 and 0.9 volts. That switching should happen multiple times per second at idle and even faster under load. When you see that pattern, the sensor is healthy. The engine has good data. Fuel economy should be normal. But when the sensor fails, the graph tells a completely different story. The voltage might barely move. It might switch very slowly, maybe once every few seconds instead of multiple times per stips per second. Sometimes it gets stuck at 0.7 or 0.8 volts, signaling rich, and just sits there. Other times it flatlines low, stuck lean. Any of these patterns mean the sensor is feeding bad data, and bad data means wasted fuel. Once you confirm the sensor is failing, replacement is straightforward. The sensor threads into the exhaust pipe. Let everything cool completely first. Exhaust components can cause serious burns if touched while hot. Disconnect the electrical connector. Some connectors have a tab you press. Others have a sliding lock. Be gentle. Broken connectors turn a simple job into a wiring nightmare. Use a proper oxygen sensor socket. It's designed to fit around the wire without damaging it. Standard sockets won't work. The wire prevents them from seating properly. The oxygen sensor socket has a slot cut in the side for the wire to pass through. Slide it over the sensor, get a good grip, apply steady force. If the sensor is stuck from years of heat cycling, don't force it. Spray penetrating oil around the threads. Let it soak for 15 minutes. Try again. Never muscle a stuck oxygen sensor. Stripped threads in an exhaust manifold turn a 15-minute job into an expensive nightmare. Some sensors come loose easily. Others fight you. Heat cycling causes the threads to corrode and seize. Patience wins here. If penetrating oil doesn't work, try gentle heat. A propane torch applied to the bung, not the sensor, can help break corrosion. But be careful. Too much heat damages nearby components. Wiring, rubber boots, plastic clips. Work smart, not aggressive. The new sensor threads in by hand to start. Make sure it's straight. Cross-threading an oxygen sensor ruins both the sensor and the bung it screws into. Start the threads carefully. Turn it in a few rotations by hand. Feel for resistance. If it binds, back it out and try again. Once it's threading smoothly, snug it down with the socket. Tighten to the manufacturer's specification, usually somewhere between 30 and 40 foot-pounds depending on the vehicle. Use anti-seize on the threads, but keep it away from the sensor tip. Most new sensors come with anti-seize already applied. If yours doesn't, use a tiny amount on the threads, not the first few threads where the tip is, just the upper threads. Too much anti-seize can contaminate the sensor element. Contamination kills oxygen sensors instantly. The sensor reads incorrectly from day one. You've just wasted money on a part that's already compromised. Reconnect the electrical connector. Make sure it clicks fully seated. A loose connection causes intermittent readings that can set false codes. Route the wire properly, away from hot exhaust components, away from sharp edges. Some vehicles have clips to hold the oxygen sensor wire in place. Use them. A wire rubbing against the exhaust will eventually wear through. Then you've got an open circuit and another sensor to replace. Start the engine and let it idle. Within seconds, the new sensor should start switching. The computer immediately recognizes the improved data. Fuel trims begin resetting. After a few minutes of idle and a short test drive, the engine relearns proper fuel delivery. The transformation is often immediate. Throttle response improves. The exhaust smell cleans up, and over the next tank of gas, fuel economy climbs back to where it should have been all along. But here's what prevents this sensor from failing prematurely in the first place: clean air intake. A clogged air filter makes the engine run rich, even with a healthy sensor. That rich mixture deposits carbon on everything downstream, including the oxygen sensor. Change your air filter on schedule. Use quality filters. Keep the intake tract clean. Inspect the air filter every oil change. If it's dark and loaded with debris, replace it. Don't wait for the maintenance reminder. Avoid cheap gas when possible. Low quality fuel contains more sulfur and additives that coat sensor elements. It's not that you need premium, you just need decent gas from reputable stations. The few extra cents per gallon prevent hundreds in wasted fuel down the line. Top-tier gas from major brands includes detergents that keep fuel systems clean. Those detergents also help prevent deposits on oxygen sensors. Fix vacuum leaks immediately. Any unmetered air entering the engine confuses the sensor readings. Small vacuum leaks cause lean conditions. The sensor reads high oxygen. The computer adds fuel. Everything gets thrown off. Common vacuum leak sources include intake manifold gaskets, PCV hoses, brake booster lines, and idle air control valves. A thorough inspection catches these before they cause sensor problems. Keep your engine properly maintained. Consumption damages oxygen sensors. If your engine burns oil, even a small vapor coats the sensor tip. Contaminated, the sensor becomes unreliable. Fix oil consumption issues before they poison expensive sensors. Coolant leaks. Coolant entering the combustion chamber creates white chalky deposits on oxygen sensors. That kills them fast. Head gaskets. Intake manifold gaskets. Anywhere coolant can leak into cylinders. Fix it before it destroys sensors and catalytic converters. Spark plugs on schedule. Weak spark causes incomplete combustion. Unburned fuel travels into the exhaust. That fuel coats everything, including the oxygen sensor. Fresh plugs maintain clean combustion. Combustion keeps sensors healthy longer. Use the spark plug specified by the manufacturer. Don't cheap out. Plugs last longer and maintain better spark throughout their service life. Use quality parts when replacing oxygen sensors. Sensors fail faster. They respond slower from the start. They tolerate less contamination. They drift sooner. I've seen off-brand sensors fail in under 20,000 miles. Name brand sensors from Bosch, Denso, or NTK cost a bit more upfront but last significantly longer and maintain accuracy throughout their life. From buying cheap sensors evaporates when you're replacing them twice as often. The other critical factor is driving style. Short trips kill oxygen sensors faster than highway miles. Runs cold, combustion is inefficient. Fuel doesn't burn completely. Moisture condenses in the exhaust. Moisture combined with unburned fuel creates corrosive conditions that accelerate sensor degradation. If you only drive 3 miles to work and back, your oxygen sensor lives in a hostile environment. Try to combine errands into longer trips when possible. Let the engine reach full operating temperature and stay there for a while. That burns off moisture, cleans the exhaust, and extends sensor life. Highway driving is actually good for exhaust components. The sustained heat and airflow keep things clean. City driving with constant stops and cold starts is the worst scenario for sensor longevity. Monitor your fuel economy actively. Don't just fill up and forget. Track your miles per gallon over several tanks. Use the same pump. Same driving conditions. Watch for trends. If you suddenly lose 3 or 4 miles per gallon over a month or two with no other changes, suspect the oxygen sensor immediately. Catching it early prevents months of wasted fuel and potential catalytic converter damage. When you do replace the sensor, many vehicles have multiple oxygen sensors. There's usually one before the catalytic converter and one after. The upstream sensor, the one before the converter, controls fuel mixture. That's the one that affects your fuel economy. The downstream sensor monitors converter efficiency. It's important for emissions, but doesn't directly control fuel delivery. Make sure you replace the right one. The reality is that most drivers lose money every month to problems they never see. Slow fuel economy. Decline feels normal. You adapt. You budget for more fuel. You accept it as part of owning an aging car. But mechanics know better. Fuel economy doesn't just fade away. Something causes it. And most of the time, that something is a sensor you've never checked, feeding lies to a computer that trusts it completely. Think about this. If you're losing just 3 miles per gallon from a lazy oxygen sensor, and you drive 1,000 miles per month, and gas costs $3.50 per gallon. You're wasting over $40 monthly. That's $480 per year for a $60 sensor and 30 minutes of work. The math isn't subtle, it's theft. Your engine is stealing from you, and the weapon is a piece of metal the size of your thumb buried in the exhaust where you never look. But the cost goes beyond just fuel. Reduced fuel economy means more frequent fill-ups, more time at gas stations, more inconvenience. If you're filling up weekly instead of every 10 days, that's 10 extra gas station stops per year. Time you could spend doing literally anything else. And every one of those extra stops reminds you that something's wrong. Even if you don't know what, the next time you're at the pump wondering why you're filling up so often, remember this: your car isn't getting old, your engine isn't wearing out, a sensor is lying. And that lie is costing you real money every single day. Check your oxygen sensor, graph its response, look at your fuel trims. The data doesn't lie even when the sensor does. Fix it before it costs you another $1, because the only thing worse than wasted fuel is wasted fuel you could have prevented with a simple sensor swap. Your engine is trying to tell you something. The rapid fuel gauge drop, the slightly rich exhaust smell, the elevated fuel trims on a scan tool. These are whispers, quiet warnings that something small is causing something expensive. Most people ignore whispers until they become screams. But by then, you've burned through hundreds of dollars in fuel you didn't need to buy, and maybe damaged a catalytic converter in the process. Don't be that driver. Be the one who understands what's happening under the hood. The one who checks sensors before symptoms become catastrophic. The one who saves money by catching problems early. Because in the end, fuel economy isn't random, it's controlled. And when it drops without explanation, the controller, that little oxygen sensor in your exhaust, is almost always the reason. Fix it, and watch your fuel economy come back from the dead. The knowledge you have now separates you from 95% of drivers on the road. They'll keep guessing, keep wasting fuel, keep blaming everything except the actual problem. You know better. You understand how the sensor works, how it fails, how to test it, how to replace it, and most importantly, why it matters. That knowledge is worth more than any single repair. It's the difference between being a victim of your vehicle and being in control of it. Choose control, check that sensor, and take back the fuel economy you've been losing.